Yeah, I used to be a Magic player. It was tough. Seriously though, I used to be a Magic the Gathering grinder. I was going to every RCQ in my area. I was traveling to Dream Hacks. I was engaging in whatever format they told me was the competitive format to be playing at the time. But decision after decision by Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast has slowly and now completely pushed me out of the game. I don't want to play against SpongeBob. I don't want to play against Spider-Man. I don't want to do it. Enter Flesh and Blood. It's the best card game out there. It's the best competitive card game out there. It is my favorite game now. It's playing on the TV right now. And it has completely satiated the competitive itch that Magic the Gathering was no longer fulfilling for me. So, if any of this sounds familiar to you, if you don't want to play against the SpongeBob cards, if you don't want half of your set releases to be these weird crossover IPs, if you don't want to be bogged down with release after release after release of utter schlock, I think you would like Flesh and Blood. And so this video is going to serve as a quick little transitionary guide for Magic players that want to get into the competitive Flesh and Blood scene. This video is going to assume that you already know the rules of the game. If you don't know how to play Flesh and Blood yet, I will link a good how to play in the description, but this video is not that. This video is going to be more for the folks who want to dive headfirst into competitive Flesh and Blood and they want to kind of fast track that process, because while there are a lot of core fundamentals that carry over between both games, Flesh and Blood does have some pretty unique elements to it that don't come super intuitively to seasoned Magic the Gathering players. And on that note, there are also Magic the Gathering heuristics that don't necessarily apply universally to Flesh and Blood. So without further ado, here is the Magic Player's Guide to Flesh and Blood. We're going to start broadly talking about resources, because I think that is one of the elements of Flesh and Blood that is most different from Magic the Gathering. So in Magic, we have the whole concept of a cost curve associated with the lands that we're playing. Turn 1, you have access to 1. Turn 2, you go up to 2, maybe 3 if you're a ramp deck, so on and so forth. Your possibilities and your plays get stronger the later the game goes because you're accruing more resources. Generally speaking, that's not really the case in Flesh and Blood. In Flesh and Blood, you'll often hear that we start at our strongest and then weaken over time as our armor breaks down. But the reason that Flesh and Blood doesn't have this sort of resource curve is because we're drawing our full hand every turn cycle, right? You want to play out all your cards so that you can draw back up to your starting intellect at the end of the turn. So every hand has the same amount of cards, the same average amount of resources given how you've constructed your deck. Ramping isn't exactly a thing the same way that it is in Magic the Gathering. There are ways to get like short-term boosts to your resources on a turn-by-turn basis. So your chest piece resources, if your tunic is ready to use, you can kind of ramp 1 that turn. There are some item cards like Energy Pot or Ruby Amulet that do a similar sort of thing, but on average you're going to be operating at about the same power level turn by turn with certain exceptions. So because we are pitching cards to use as resources and they're going back to the bottom of the deck, this introduces a concept in Flesh and Blood that at first was super daunting to me. I thought I would never be able to understand it, but it turns out it's not even that huge of a deal in Flesh and Blood, and it's something that you can often just not even think about, and that is pitch stacking. So when I first learned about Flesh and Blood, I thought we had to like memorize our entire decks, and every game was going to be this like 2-hour long slog where we're going to second and third cycle and just like perfectly stacking our deck. It doesn't happen like that very often. There are certain very grindy matchups where maybe you'll be going to second, third cycle and setting up pitch stacks, but there are so many more aggressive games in the format that don't really even get to second cycle. So at a baseline, if you just want to play Flesh and Blood hand to hand and maximize each turn that way, you're going to be doing relatively okay starting off in the competitive scene. So going back to that concept of drawing back up to our starting hand size every turn cycle, this also plays into why the concept of card advantage is a little different in Flesh and Blood than in Magic the Gathering. In Flesh and Blood, drawing 2 cards is basically too powerful. About a year ago, they went back and banned a whole bunch of cards that said draw 2 cards on them because it was just too good. The nature of this game is such that 1 extra card in a turn cycle is very powerful. So there's not going to be typically like divination type effects or like Sphinx's Revelation type effects in this game. Oftentimes you have your 4-card hand, maybe it's 5 cards with your arsenal, and if you go up just 1 card in that turn cycle, it is a very heavy advantage. So card advantage in this game is more about optimizing each one of your turn cycles to make sure that you're playing all of your cards out, so that when you draw up at the end of of the turn, you are drawing as many cards as possible, and you're not stuck with cards in your hand. We call that an intellect penalty. If at the end of the turn cycle, you still have cards in your hand, if I would normally draw 4 cards up to my starting hand size, but I have 1, well, there I only draw 3 cards. You can see how this sort of long-term card advantage game starts to come into play. Card advantage often manifests itself in more aggressive scenarios in this game. So we have attacks like Snatch, we have Mask of Momentum for ninjas, Channel Lightning Valley for the lightning heroes. There are some defensive applications as well. That All You Got and Truce are both defensive cards that can get a card back so that you can block out but still hold a little bit of cards. So card advantage, a lot more tame, I would say, in Flesh and Blood, but still just as powerful as you remember it. The idea of tempo or who's the beatdown is really interesting in Flesh and Blood as well. So let's take a hyper-aggressive deck and use that as an example. In Magic the Gathering, if I'm playing red deck wins and I'm playing against a control deck or whatever, I'm usually trying to be as fast as possible, right? We have to think about playing around board sweeps, for example, but we don't really ever pivot to the control deck, right? If we're burn against blue-white control, we're always the beatdown. Aggressive decks in Flesh and Blood, since this game is so much on a turn-by-turn basis, there can be turns as the aggressive deck where you just have to be on defense because your hand doesn't convert offensively well enough, or your opponent's offense is so much that you would be losing value if you just took their damage and tried to send your subpar turn, right? Sometimes in Flesh and Blood, an aggro deck will just have to fold its hand. The concept of folding a hand is I will block everything because I can't take all the damage you're sending me, or I will be too far behind. I can't just block a little bit of the damage and then try to send back a little bit of offense because the hand, for whatever reason, doesn't work out that way. So sometimes, even when you are the aggressive deck in the matchup, it is correct to just block out with the whole hand, preserve your life total a little bit, and then draw up a new hand for the next turn cycle. It can feel a little counterintuitive, but over the course of a couple games, you'll start to really feel those moments out. The back and forth of determining who's the beatdown can really switch on a dime, turn to turn. Totally forgot to mention this one. Aggro decks usually want to go second in Flesh and Blood. Sounds weird, right? I want to go first. I want to attack. But remember, in Flesh and Blood, at the end of the first turn, both players draw back up to their maximum hand size. So, if you attack a whole bunch and your opponent blocks it all out, you both draw back up to 4 cards, you start the second turn, and they start attacking you. Well, if you block, you're not drawing those cards back up. So, the aggro deck usually wants to go second, because if your opponent goes first, you can block all their damage, draw your full hand up, and then when you start the second turn of the game, your first turn, all of your attacks, if they block, they're not drawing those cards back up. Basically, going second in Flesh and Blood, you get to block the first turn for free. So an aggro deck doesn't want their first attack to get blocked for free. Therefore, aggro deck wants to go second. Isn't that right, Bear? Disruption and evasion in Flesh and Blood manifests itself a little differently than in Magic the Gathering, but similar concepts. So disruption in Flesh and Blood most commonly manifests itself in the form of on-hits. An attack will say when this hits, do a thing. Command and Conquer, Persuasive Prognosis. Guardians have their own version of it with Crush, which demands that a certain amount of damage from the attack be dealt in order to get the effect. This is the most common form of disruption, I would say, in Flesh and Blood, is attacks that threaten to strip cards from the opponent's hand or turn off their hero abilities or destroy their arsenal. These are the sorts of things. And so playing around this disruption is playing defensively, blocking out those on-hits, trying to prevent as much of that damage as possible, or seeing how you can work around the disruption. What happens if they take this card? What happens if I don't have a hero ability? Disruption is very much ingrained in combat in this game, and it makes the back and forth feel really interesting with the attack reactions and the defense reactions. It almost feels like a stack of like spell, counterspell, negate, dispel kind of thing, but it's combat, so it's awesome. Evasion also exists in Flesh and Blood, just ways to make damage difficult to prevent. I would say our analog to flying or horsemanship would be dominate, or more recently overpower. So these are keywords that limit the number or type of cards you can block with in your hand. Another form of evasion I would say is arcane damage. You can't block with traditional means. You have to include Arcane Barrier somewhere in your deck. And that can be easier for some heroes than for others, just based on their class. Warriors traditionally do not have a good time preventing arcane damage, so the player presenting the arcane damage is demanding that their opponent either make their own equipment suite worse by including Arcane Barrier, or they just get to have unfettered access to their arcane damage. Archetypes in Flesh and Blood. Some are pretty similar, some manifest in very different ways. Aggro is going to be generally similar. You'll have low cost curves, you're going to want to play a lot of attacks. We mentioned earlier that still you'll have to fold a hand sometimes and be defensive on like one turn cycle, but in general, you don't want to block a lot and you want to go boom, 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 and kill your opponent. So this would be like Syndra or Dash IO. For mid-range, some people argue on whether or not there is like true mid-range in Flesh and Blood, but I think there is. Like, there are heroes that just play a little defensively and send a little bit of offense, and that feels generally mid-range to me. I think most warriors would fall into the mid-range category. Probably Runeblades as well. Definitely Florian feels like a mid-range deck. Combo is super different in this game, with the exception of Kano, who is exactly Storm. Weird sort of off-the-wall combo decks in Magic the Gathering just don't usually exist in Flesh and Blood. We don't have a good like Charbelcher analog or Oops All Spells kind of thing. If it does happen in Flesh and Blood, it's usually a mistake and it usually gets immediately banned. And then Control is also pretty different because this game is about attacking and blocking. You can't necessarily get away with just being like a no win condition Forniphalia Drown Yard kind of control deck. You're still gonna have to pressure your opponent with those on-hit effects to be disruptive and to prevent them from enacting their game plan. Oftentimes, if there is a controlling strategy in Flesh and Blood, it would win by what is called fatigue. So if the aggressive deck has a bunch of attacks that cost 0, they don't have to pitch for any of their cards, theoretically, they could play every card in their deck. Well, if the controlling player is able to survive all that damage and block enough of it that their opponent has run out of cards, as long as they still have just one blue card to pitch and attack with their weapon, they win the game. It's almost like Mill, but you don't lose for having 0 cards in your deck. You just die. And usually concede immediately. Control in this game would often manifest itself in that way, trying to fatigue your opponent out of their good attacks and just running them out of offense, really. You can kind of think of fatigue in Flesh and Blood as being a Blue-Red Phoenix player in Magic the Gathering, and you boarded out your Ledger Shredders and Crackling Drakes, and they exiled all 4 of your Phoenixes. So now you have to try and win a game with just Picklock Pranksters. A controlling deck in this game might be Jarl. It's not the most common strategy, but it certainly exists. Organized play. This is like the thing. If it wasn't the fact that Flesh and Blood is mechanically the greatest card game of all time, it also has the greatest organized play structure of all time. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's not trying to do anything goofy. It is simply a refinement of the organized play system that we all used to love for Magic the Gathering. Every week, you can go to your local events and you can play for some packs and promos. And from there are just so many opportunities to play in more and more meaningful events throughout the year. We have skirmish seasons, which offer really sweet promos that can often fetch a decent price. We have pro quests, which are PTQs, which happen multiple times throughout the year, and the seasons are full of events. Oftentimes we'll go to 4 or 5 PQs throughout the season. We have battle hardens that award Pro Tour invites and cash and gold foil promos, up to the callings and the Pro Tours and the World Championships and our national championships. There's just so many opportunities to play competitive Flesh and Blood. And what's great is that you don't feel like you're wasting your time. Don't get me wrong, I just love going to tournaments. I went to every RCQ that I could, but like, what? It's a 1-slotter and you lose in the finals and you've got nothing to show for it, or it's a 2-slotter and 2 people get to go to the next qualifier and it's like, that's it. With Flesh and Blood, your results have immediate impact. Pro quests are going to be the same, just the winner gets the Pro Tour invite, but there are so many of them and it's straight from the store to the Pro Tour. There's no, the RCQ qualifies you for the RC, which might qualify you for the Pro Tour. No. If you win the PTQ at your frickin' local game store, you're going to the Pro Tour. We mentioned Nationals, which United States Nationals, at least, is one of the biggest tournaments of the year. How do you qualify for Nationals? You just have to get top 4 at one of the national qualifiers, which are very similar in structure to the Pro Quests. You go to your local store, you play in a tournament, but top 4 qualify for Nationals. So it's like a 4-slotter for US Nationals, but they're all throughout the season. It's so good. If you miss a comprehensive tournament structure that gives you genuine incentives to go out and play in tournaments, we've got you. And then for online resources, where do you go to get some information? We have our de facto decklist depository. That's going to be fabrary.com. I'll link it in the description. This is where you're going to find tournament lists. This is where you're going to build your own decks. It is integrated with Flesh and Blood's Gem software. So if you build a deck on Fabrary, you can upload it straight to Gem and register it for your next major tournament. It is an awesome software. It's really helpful. It's got a bunch of data and statistics. Love Fabrary. The official Flesh and Blood website actually has amazing articles by current pros in the scene. It gives you really good insight into strategy. It almost feels like the golden era of like the Star City Games articles, except it's directly from LSS. And then we have amazing content creators all over that are putting in so much work. Mansant, Yuki Lee Bender, Majin Bay, the Card Guys, Lupine Fiasco. I'm gonna forget so many names, but there are class specialists or just general geniuses of the game who are going to give you so much insight and help you level up so much quicker. I booked a coaching session with Yuki Lee Bender before one of my first major tournaments, and it was invaluable. The community here is approachable, they're great people, and they are so knowledgeable. And we all want everybody to be great at this game. So the resources are out there. I'll link a few of these channels in the description as well. And yeah, go check out their content, support the content creators out there, because we all want this game to keep growing.
You could even like this video and subscribe to this channel if you wanted to.
This video is already getting kind of long, and I feel like I could just talk forever about this. If there are things that I should have talked about and that you wish I had talked about, let me know in the comments. Maybe we can do an updated version of this video or something. I'd love to get into the classes on a more granular level, but that is an idea for a future video that we're working on. So stay tuned for a Classes for Dummies series, because we're working on it. I'm having so much fun making these videos. I hope this was helpful for folks that want to get into competitive Flesh and Blood. I've been having a blast learning how to get good at this game. If you have any other questions, please let us know in the comments. I read all of them. If you like the video, do the thumb thing, and if you hit the subscribe button. And I don't have a Metafy because I'm actually bad at this game, so just leave a comment.